Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 18th of March 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. In the meantime, let's go to the front line. We're going to start up in the north. Thank you so much to JR who's done the mapping. He is amazing. Right, so we're going to go to this northern border area, and Andrew Perpetua has changed his mapping and deep state map actually a little bit in a couple of these areas to denote some sort of territorial gains for the freedom fighters, for the Free Russia fighters, whatever you want to call them. There are now, it appears, 4 different battalions now. There's a 4th name that's been thrown in that I hadn't seen before. Anyway, basically the Siberia Battalion, the Russian Volunteer Corps, and the Freedom of Russia Legion. But they have been working hard at, I don't know what their intention is, so working hard at doing something. I don't know whether it is just an overall like a sort of PR thing in light of the elections that have been and gone, or whether they're actually genuinely trying to take territory. But in that case, what are they trying to do in taking that territory? So is it a larger project of trying to fix Russian troops, forces, air defense, equipment, anything in that area so it can't be used elsewhere? Is this actually, is it working? I mean, people like Andrew Perpetua is really condemnatory about this. He condemns what the Ukrainians, or the Russians here, but by extension the Ukrainians who have sort of given them the weapons and equipment to do so, what they're doing here with the losses that they may have maintained, so or taken. So yeah, I'm not giving any kind of evaluation yet because I don't really know what's going on along the front lines. There are still talks about Belgorod being hit by missiles. In fact, given that claim, there are still people, myself included, wondering exactly who's doing the missile shooting around there. Are these explosions that are happening inside Belgorod as a result of air defense units within Belgorod taking down things that are flying over Belgorod, or are these the Ukrainians or pro-Ukrainian Russians firing into Belgorod? Just to add to that, there's an image that came out today of a Pantsir missile in the side of a Russian building in Belgorod. So the Russian air defenses are at least operational within Belgorod and shooting into Belgorod. Like, there is a building with a Pantsir Russian air defense missile sticking out of it. So I don't know. I just don't know. And yeah, the Russians are having a bit of a time of putting the pro-Ukrainian Russian fighters back across the border. So we have an area called Kazinka here that towards Grivoron that they attacked towards last time they attacked into Russia, and the Ukrainian or the Free Russia troops have gained some territory towards Kazinka. There was talk about them putting up a flag or having control of an administrative building, in the Kazinka area, but I'm not sure where that is, whether that is over here or whether it is somewhere else. But nonetheless, yeah, activity there. And also just a little to the east, we have slightly more territory with Gukovsky, being controlled by the Ukrainians. So this is what has been widely claimed, given there are some not by the Ukrainians, by the Free Russia troops. I can't get used to saying that. They have filmed themselves with flags in the area, so it does seem like they have control of that. But again, how much does that mean? What is their end goal? Who knows? Right, moving on from there, it's quite incredible to say that there's basically no movement on the front line. And as I've said for the last few days, when that is happening, that is exceptionally good news for the Ukrainians. There might even be some blue pins around Avdiivka for the Ukrainians, because Syriac Maps has just updated their mapping, and I don't think that's been reflected in... I mean, JR has done the mapping prior to Syriac releasing that, although I don't know if that's in reference to a change from yesterday. But nonetheless, this is really significant. No changes to that entire northeastern axis. I know there might be some issues going on Syriac Maps. I mean, other than the fact that there's this massive spat going on between Syriac Maps and Andrew Perpetua, JR was telling me that there are some issues with some funky mapping. It looks like there might be some technical issues with Syriac map. So I don't know if that is causing there to be no changes from Syriac maps. I'm just going to see what the latest is actually. More that I'm not sure what he means in that area. Probably that not that much. No, so yeah, so there are no changes then actually, which is incredible to think this is the case, given that this is supposedly a kind of offensive period for the Russians, and they have not achieved anything in the Bakhmut area for the best part of a week. They've achieved virtually nothing in the entire Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea front line for the best part of a week. No moves in Seversk, likewise. And most of the activity's been around Avdiivka and further to the south. But even today, nothing to report. But we'll go first to Bakhmut. I've been talking about how the Russians have failed to get further on in Ivanivska, and that appears to be because, as mentioned before, there is some high ground around Ivanivska to the north and to the northwest, where the Ukrainians have control, and that means that they can strike down into Ivanivska. I think it's been pretty much razed to the ground, Ivanivska as a settlement. Nonetheless, they're finding it difficult to advance through there due to the Ukrainian positioning up here. We were talking previously about how the Russians were trying to get up this hill and take those positions, and that would be a real issue for the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians seem to have held on to that, and that, I think, has been the key to them forcing the Russians to halt here about halfway through the village. Indeed, if you go and watch a reporting from Ukraine's video today, it's all about that, and all about how they've lost quite a few bits of kit, and how the Ukrainians have indeed stalled the Russians there. And there was talking there about culmination. I keep mentioning this. I'm fascinated to think that, well, I just wonder whether the Russians really are culminating properly, and what that means about these claims that they are somehow going to mount a really significant push in the late spring and summer, while we're marching through spring at the moment, and they are unable to push anywhere other than this southern area in any significant manner at the moment, it seems. And my goodness, you're only as good as your last day, the last week, so things could change. But it just seems like the Russians are struggling. The Ukrainians are getting more equipment filtering through, and I think that's probably making quite a difference as well. And it just makes you wonder, had they had the $60 billion package from 5 months ago, whether the Russians would have not taken Avdiivka as is claimed. So it looks like that could have been the case, because they're now grinding to a halt even there. Deep State Maps has a tiny bit of a gain around Orlivka. We're going to pop into some of the claims around here just to let you know that Institute for the Study of War, the American military think tank, has no information really on that northeastern sector or axis, where it's just positional fighting there. And then look at this for Bakhmut, just positional fighting, no serious activity that's changing control of any of the map there. And then when we come down to Avdiivka, not really a huge amount given what's happened there recently, where we've moved from like 3 massive paragraphs to a relatively short paragraph here. But geolocated footage published on the 16th indicates that, again, this is 2 days ago though, that Russian forces recently advanced northwest of Tonyenka, and a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced along Centralna Street in that settlement. And geolocated footage published again 2 days ago also indicates that Russian forces recently advanced to the central part of Orlivka. So let's go and have a look at these geolocations, bearing in mind that they are probably going to be geolocations that sit behind present Russian lines, because this is coming now from a couple of days ago. I'm just trying to see what else is. We'll do the geolocations first and then go back to Syriac map. So Tonyenka here, as mentioned, we've got a strike on a FPV drone striking on a Russian piece of kit, and as well as some further footage too. These are a couple of desert crosses being destroyed, which is interesting in and of itself. So when we're talking about culmination, it's trying to join all the dots together. And what does all the data tell us? Well, they're starting to use golf carts to attack in the Avdiivka area. I had this discussion with Daniela from Tochny the other day. Is this a sign that hey, nothing's bad, we're just using the right kit for the right job? Or is using golf carts like the option they have to resort to because they don't have the equipment? And he was feeling it was the latter, and I think it's an element of the latter. Like, I don't think they would be using these things if they could be using APCs and IFVs. I just think that this is another indication that possibly the Russians are struggling. I don't want to be too positive for the Ukrainians, but just get that sense. And here's an FPV drone hitting a tank in, I presume, in the area. Let's see where that is. Interesting, that's actually into the grey zone there. So that's further to the west of Tonyenka. And that would, well, again, that could suggest either they control that ground, but none of the mappers have that. So it's likely an attack that has been thwarted rather than anything else. Yes, so that's all the geolocation for the Tonyenka area. Then we go up to Avdiivka. So Avdiivka is just to the north. Where we can see Deep State Maps has some small gains, pushing the Ukrainians right back pretty much to this river area as the river comes down here. It's a very small river by the looks of it, but it is does form into some lakes that present some challenges for the Russians if they want to move further to the west with equipment. Anyway, the geolocation here and the translation is destruction of Russian infantry with first-person view kamikaze drones southeast of the village of Avdiivka. So the Russian infantry are in various places. Let's punch in some of these coordinates to the map and see what we have. No, let's not. Let's not see what we have. Let's do that again, shall we? Okay. So, yep. Oh, okay. That's not really at all showing any advances there, but you have the Ukrainians hitting Russian infantry in that area, so I guess that's good. But what to be expected given that the Ukrainians are going to be using an awful lot of FPV drones here as much as anywhere. We did an analysis. Well, I say we. Daniela did an analysis in the live stream on Friday, and he's had further data that I added into my news piece this morning, talking about how much the Ukrainians are using first-person view drones to hammer the Russian positions, trenches, infantry, and vehicles. And it appears they've got, for this month of March, an advantage in every single category for hitting Russians more than the Russians are hitting the Ukrainians. And I think that's massively significant for Ukraine going forward. Anyway, that's much closer to the front line there. So anyway, it looks like those hits to the Russians in Avdiivka are in around where we'd expect them to be anyway. So I don't think that signifies any further moves. Now we go back to Syriac Maps. It says that the situation north of Avdiivka, and this is not on the mapping at the moment, but this was registered by the other mappers yesterday, I believe, unless this is referring to yesterday's claim. Let's see if that big box sits up there. No, so this is a change to Syriac Maps since JR did the mapping today. So during the last 48 hours, the Ukrainian army has increased the attacks along the railway and south of Novomykhailivka and managed to recapture some positions in its axis. So it's incredible that the Ukrainians are pushing back here. I think there is still a part of Avdiivka in a grey zone. The proximity to the Duma River prevents the Russian army from completely securing the locality. Meanwhile, fighting in Tonyenka continues in the northern part of the village where Ukrainian troops are holding their positions. So that is to say that there is fighting in Tonyenka and Avdiivka, as we've just been discussing, but that the Ukrainians have, and that's now all the mappers agreeing, because yesterday we had Deep State Maps and Andrew Perpetua showing that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back. Syriac Maps, not so quick when the Ukrainians make gains, the last one to make the changes there, but then when the Russians make gains is fully onto that and overzealous there. And that is kind of what the spat is between Andrew Perpetua and Surat Maps, is that Andrew is claiming, look, you are wrong so often, and we have all the receipts to show this, and the main thing he gets wrong is saying that the Russians have control when they just have a blown up vehicle somewhere. It does not mean they have control. Anyway, that the Ukrainians are pushing back here is significant because, as I said yesterday in a live stream, by pushing the Russians back here, they are giving themselves a breather so that the Russians can't easily come round to the north and behind the river and high ground. So this is high ground here, or higher ground, and the Russians are to the west, or to the in this case to the southwest of the river. It's going to be difficult for the Russians to get equipment across the river, so they really would want to come in across, maybe up the railway here and down behind the river that kind of goes all the way up to almost the railway. So they'll want to come along the railway and down from the north. Now, if the Ukrainians are pushing them back along the railway, it means that the Ukrainians, I think, well, obviously they're going to be cognizant of this, and they're doing a good job of stopping the Russians getting behind the Ukrainian line. So I think that is a really significant move for the Ukrainians if they are indeed succeeding there. Right, then going on to what the ISW also says, nothing more from the Avdiivka area. It's more coming down now to Marinka and Novomykhailivka. So we'll just pop out of that area, and no changes to Pervomaisky, to Nevelsky, to Krasnohorivka. And then we've got Marinka down to Novomykhailivka. No mapping changes, although there are some things to point out from the Institute for the Study of War. But I think that's incredibly important that the Russians, for a couple of days, haven't made, well, really over the last week, things have slowed down. They have made advances, but it's not to the rate they were previously. So geolocated footage, says the ISW, published on March 14th, so it's going back some time, shows elements of the Russian 39th Motorized Rifle Brigade striking Ukrainian positions south of Novomykhailivka. Yep, okay, indicating that Ukrainian forces have advanced in the area. So Ukrainian forces advancing because of strikes in Novomykhailivka. We'll come to that second. We'll just go north to south. So it's actually Marinka next. So geolocated footage published on the 17th, yesterday, indicates that Russian forces marginally advanced northeast of Marinka. Okay, so here we have Marinka, 46th Assault Brigade, disposes of an assault group of Russian occupiers of unarmored vehicles. So the Russians have lost some more equipment around Marinka. Here we'll plug it in and see what that tells us, if anything. Probably just confirms what we already know in terms of where the Russians are. Yep, so that's behind the Russian lines. And I have a feeling that most of these are going to be sort of tanks and BMPs getting destroyed in places that we'd expect them to be anyway. So this is data coming from the ISW that is sometimes there's a bit of a lag as they're reporting from last night from the previous 24 hours. So sometimes it can be 24 hours old, 48 hours old. So that is slightly more significant. It shows that the Russians are using equipment somewhat north of the Deep State and Andrew Perpetua maps, but behind Surat maps. So this would then support what I was saying earlier, yet again, that if they're pushing and attacking, Surat maps will change the mapping to say the Russians control that area, but the reality on the ground is that they are just driving through a grey zone and getting destroyed. And that's what this footage appears to show, which is a destroyed tank. So there you go. That's the geolocation there from the ISW. Then we're going to go to what they previously said about Novomykhailivka. So this is slightly further to the south. So no changes to Marinka from what we had from yesterday. And the claim here is that the Ukrainians are slightly further towards Russian territory than had previously been understood by the ISW. Positional combat in the area of Novomykhailivka, artillery shelling by the Russian armed forces on the position of the Ukrainians. So I'm going to be interested to see where these Ukrainians are and whether it makes me raise my eyebrows or whether it's another case of like, yeah, that pretty much fits in with what we've already got. No, so that is interesting. So this is, and as it says here, in the agricultural buildings on the southern approaches to Novomykhailivka. So depending on what the timestamp of this is, I mean, that's released on the 17th, but does it definitely refer, is the footage actually from the 17th? I don't know, from yesterday. But if the Ukrainians are in this agricultural area here, then obviously Surat Maps is not correct. deep state maps and Andrew Perpetua are more likely to be correct. But that's significant because that they are, obviously wanting to put paid to the Russian advances here. And there's not been a huge amount of movement over the last week. It's coming kind of fits and starts in Novomykhailivka, and then suddenly they've taken a few roads and whatnot. But if the Ukrainians can keep them there and keep Konstantinivka safe and this road coming down to Vuhledar, then that's a Herculean task, and they've done really well. So to me, this is one of the most important areas on the whole front line at the moment. It's there, and it is Marinka as well, really. Those two places, I think, super important, and you can add Krasnohorivka into that Marinka. So that area and this area, I think, are super important. Anyway, we'll move on from there and come to the southern front line, go back to the ISW and see what they have to say. And actually, just not a lot to mention. Positional engagements going on in Velika Novosilka. Some talk in Robotyne or near Robotyne, that the Russians have taken control of a village called Myrna. Now, here's Robotyne, and Myrna's right up here. Is it Myrna? Does that mean peace, I think, ironically? And that village is already under Russian control, as according to both Andrew Perpetua and Surat Maps. So the claim that the Russians have taken control of Myrna, to me, doesn't quite work. But I can't remember whether that was one that had just been added the other day from these mappers. So maybe that is ISW agreeing with a change that these mappers have made. I can't remember whether it is Myrna or not. There was some movement up near Chivone as well. In fact, that is mentioned here in Surat Maps. So this came out yesterday evening. The last 2 days, the Russian armies continued to advance southeast to Chivone, reaching the bank of the Yanchia River. In addition, today it was announced the capture of the locality of Myrna. The Russian presence in the locality was previously confirmed. However, today they consolidated new positions in the north and west of it to ensure their control. So that's Myrna there. As mentioned, Surat Maps said that already controlled it, but maybe new positions. But I don't know that that's a change in the mapping there as it is over here. Not 100% sure, but it could be. Anyway, yeah. And then what else? No, that's exactly the same. So then as we come down, so no changes to the mappers from what we have from yesterday. As we come down to Kherson and the Dnipro River, you can see there's no changes in Krinky, as we've come to expect. The ISW says positional fighting is taking place there, particularly near Krinky and the Antonivsky roadway bridge. And so there was talk yesterday about the Ukrainians being active around Antonivsky bridge. We're unsure whether it's the railway bridge or the road bridge, but it's the road bridge being mentioned today. I didn't think that they were not active there, but we haven't heard about the Ukrainians on the left bank of the river in those areas for some time. It's all been about Krinky and only Krinky, really. And here it says Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian Spetsnaz, so that's a special forces, conducted a raid in an unspecified area on the west bank of Kherson at an unspecified time earlier this week. So who knows where that is, but the Spetsnaz doing something. You would assume it's either going to be in Krinky or down near the Antonivsky Bridge sort of areas, as that's where the Ukrainians are still most active. Okay, that's the end of the frontline update today. Another good day for Ukraine by point of fact that Russians really don't seem to be making any large gains, but they could just be reconstituting before they go again. There's so many conflicting claims about how many troops they have, whether they're combat ready, how much equipment they have, whether they're amassing here, whether they're amassing there. The claims about 100,000 up in Luhansk. The claims about 40,000 in around this area. Bakhmut and then Avdiivka, and then what's going on everywhere else. And yet, good news today is that there's not much movement. And meanwhile, the Ukrainians are making themselves, or the pro-Ukrainian Russians are making a nuisance of themselves on the northern border. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.